One of the most explicit claims to divinity, to be God, that Jesus makes is in the Gospel of John, and it's connected with one of the most beloved images of Jesus in Christian iconography and art, and also in pastoral teaching, and that's the idea of the Good Shepherd. When we look in John chapter 10 together, which you should have already read or be reading now, as we're looking at that, Jesus introduces this, and he uses it in a couple of different ways. He just simply begins one of his discourses saying, "Truly I tell you, anybody who doesn't enter the sheepfold by the gate but climbs in another way is a thief or the bandit. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep and leads them out by name. He has brought them all out ahead of him, and then he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will not follow a stranger, but they will run from him because they do not know the voice of a stranger." Jesus used this as a figure of speech with them, but they didn't understand what he was saying. So Jesus said to them, "Truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and bandits, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved, and will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes to kill and steal and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly." He says, "I am the good shepherd, and the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand, who is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep, sees a wolf coming and leaves the sheep and runs away, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. The hired hand runs away because he does not care for the sheep. But I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. As the Father knows me, and I know the Father, I lay down my life for the sheep." So did you hear that specific claim to, "I know the Father, and the Father knows me"? And that's the way that Jesus knows the people who believe in him, who are his sheep. A shepherd is one who provides care, who goes out ahead of, who protects and provides for the flock. So he's expressing his relationship to the people who come to God through him. And he's claiming to be the gate, the way to God here. He said, "For this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life in order to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it up again, and I received this command from my Father." So this is his version in the Gospel of John of predicting his death. And he does it in the context of it's part of his shepherding work for the people of God. Again, the Jews are divided because of his word. And when John uses the Jews, this is probably an important point. We don't need to read that as pejorative, like, "you evil Jews." It's not like that. Jesus and all of his disciples and almost all of the early believers and the author of this book were Jews, ethnically, religiously. They were Jews that believed in Jesus. When John uses that phrase, he's either using that as the population of the people of the land, or more specifically, if he uses it negatively, as like the Jewish leadership that was opposed to Jesus. And unfortunately, that phrase has been used to justify some pretty bad things towards Jewish people, and that should never be the case. That's just a literary feature of how he is writing his account. But anyway, these folks are divided because of him. And he's saying, some say he has a demon and he's out of his mind. Why listen to him? And others were saying, "These are not the words of one who has a demon. And could a demon open the eyes of the blind?" And then the festival of the dedication takes place in Jerusalem. He's walking around through the temple. And in verse 24, some of the Jews gather around him and say, "How long will you keep us in suspense? Be plain with us. Tell us if you are the Messiah." Jesus says, "I have told you, and you don't believe. The works that I'm doing in my Father's name testify to me." So he's saying, look at what I'm all about, what I'm doing, what I'm saying. That should tell you the truth. I'm not hiding what I am. He says, "You do not believe because you don't belong to my sheep. My sheep hear my voice. I know them, and they follow me. I give them eternal life." So Jesus is saying, I give people who believe in God through me eternal life, and they will never perish. No one will snatch them out of my hand. What my Father has given me is greater than all else, and no one can snatch them out of my Father's hand. For I and my Father are one. And the immediate reaction to that is some of the people in the crowd pick up a stone, and they're going to stone Jesus to death. When you stone somebody to death in the Bible, you don't do that with marijuana. I had to explain that in youth group once. You do that with a rock, because something they've said is offensive or something they've done is incredibly wrong to you. And Jesus responds to their objection about being God's son. He said, "You're all God's sons, but I'm something a little different." And he's claiming a complete unity with the Father, that I and my Father are one. So that's one of the most explicit claims to divinity, and certainly his critics and the early believers, understood that very early on. So Gospel of John, as you can see, is kind of divisive, that people are either for Jesus or against Jesus, and to reject Jesus is to reject the ultimate revelation of God. There's simply nothing more that God could do that would leave people free to respond without compelling them to do something against their will, which just kind of isn't his thing. So as we look at the Gospel of John, to not believe, those who have believed in the Son of God are not condemned. Those who haven't believed are condemned already because they haven't believed. So Jesus is definitely not leaving a room for a middle ground. In recent years, that has become a really controversial part of the study of the Gospel of John, as we live in a more increasingly religiously pluralistic world where people want to say, well, that's fine for you, that's your truth, but that's not my truth. Jesus doesn't really leave a lot of middle ground for that. He's saying you either believe or you don't believe, you're in or you're out, and you have to make a decision. As you look through the Gospel of John, you're going to notice on your discussion post for this week, that's really where all of this is rooted. Jesus basically says, I am something. He is claiming to be something. And, when somebody makes an absolute claim, if somebody, says green beans are nasty, that wouldn't be true for me. I love them. That's one of my favorite things to eat, but my wife hates them. So we have a different view of truth about the nature of the green bean, and that's fine. That can be subjective. But when it comes down to, are we really here, or is reality imaginary? Is there a heaven? Is there not a heaven? Is there a hell? Is there not a hell? Somebody's right and somebody's wrong. Both of those things are about objective truth, and they can't both be right. Unless our reality is so subjective it doesn't mean anything anyway. So Jesus is making some pretty definitive claims in the early church, by 80, 90, by the time this thing is written, is advancing these claims and saying, this is what Jesus said, this is what we believe about him, this is what he taught us about who he was, and it is true, believe it or don't. And that's essentially where we're looking at the discussion post for this week. But Jesus is saying something about his relationship to believers, one that he connects them to God and he holds them securely in his hand, and that they're the way. He is the way to life. He's providing that through laying down his life for the sheep. So John understands his death on the cross not as like a failure, but as a moment of victory. And that becomes particularly true, in the second part of the gospel in his presentation of the passion story itself.